Five of the Best is an opinion-based series on films which I have seen released during the chosen year. This is to celebrate previous years in film, not to cause any offence. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to 5 of the Best, a series in which we celebrate movies year by year. This series will consist of me discussing my 5 favourite films from this chosen year. And in this video we'll be talking about the year 2021. And now again we did have a little bit of a fallover from the quiet, lesser movie release schedule that we had from 2020, but there's a bit more to work with from 2021. So let's get into the Honourable Mentions. Before we get into our top 5, here are the Honourable Mentions for 2021. Nobody. Spencer. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. The Guilty. And The Courier. Now, let's get on to the list and start with number 5. A Quiet Place Part 2. It's directed by John Krasinski and stars Emily Blunt, Millicent Simmons and Cillian Murphy. So here it is, the first film in the history of this channel that I'm talking about twice in depth. This was not too long after I started doing initial thoughts videos, and this was the first film that I really enjoyed. Because it started with Zack Snyder's Justice League, which was fine for what it was, and I had a few kind of films I didn't enjoy as much, Spiral, and I'm thinking back to that time of early 2021. But then we had A Quiet Place Part 2. Now going into A Quiet Place Part 2, the first film is brilliant. The first film really encapsulates everything brilliant about innovative horror. And you hear that term thrown about quite a lot nowadays, and sometimes it probably is thrown about because there's a lack of it. So many horror films delve into the sequel, do the same thing, and change some of the outcomes, and let's make a lot more money. Things like Paranormal Activity. Things like Saw, which of course has varying degrees of good and bad. Things like Insidious, again, some good, some bad. And you have these big, long series. But then you have movies like Get Out, movies like A Quiet Place. And for the first A Quiet Place, obviously I didn't get chatting about it because it was a really, really strong year. But it was unlucky not to get a place in the top 5 that year because I really enjoyed it. I thought it was brilliantly innovative, as I say. And having John Krasinski in his first directorial role, you have Emily Blunt, his wife, playing this brilliant mother character. Millicent Simmons, who steals the show in both the first film and the second film. And a world that you don't really know too much about in both the first and second film. More of it is, most of the film in both cases is situational. You actually learn so much about world building in this film, the part 2, for the first kind of 10 to 15 minute sequence, when the first attack happens and everything else. And I don't want to go too much into plot details because I would recommend you seeing it for yourself. But for A Quiet Place Part 2 in particular, the first film I loved instantly. The second film I really enjoyed on a first watch. But I went back and rewatched it, and actually, I think I enjoyed it more the second time. I think the second film is really strong. And loads of people really seem to go to town and saying, oh, it's nowhere near as good as the original, and we are so quick to do that with sequels. And don't get me wrong, I don't dispute people saying the first one's better. I think, personally, they're both 8.5s out of 10, truthfully. I think the first one might edge it more in the isolation side of things, but the second film expands it more in more of a stronger way. I'll give you an example. The first film in the Purge series, and again, that's funny, I didn't even use that as an example when I was talking about series that got drawn out and wasted. The first film of The Purge was quite an isolated home invasion movie. Of course, it had a bit of world building telling you about, what was going on around the world or around America for the Purge happening, and you only seen a little bit of television scenes or CCTV footage, and that was it. But everything was in the house, and what was on the front porch, what was sneaking in the back door, etc., etc. And that was what was captivating about the first Purge. But then the second Purge, Purge Anarchy, I believe it was, which took it out onto the streets and really made it this open world with the situation that it's in. Of course, vastly different, but the only reason I use that example is because A Quiet Place 2 does that in quite a clever way. Because in the first film, they defend their house. The second, it's a family defending their house against these ongoing attackers and learning to cope with this new life. Whereas A Quiet Place Part 2 is more of a travelling through the wasteland and all the trials and tribulations they have to go through because of it. And I think both are equally effective in different ways. And I think that was a smart move by Krasinski and everybody else involved to change the... Because, let's be honest, if A Quiet Place 2 was them holed up and these creatures were coming to attack them, and that was it, I just don't think that would have been as effective. And yes, there is certain parts in this movie where they're in a location for a bit of time, but then they move. There's a sequence in this movie with kind of like a dock down by the water. There's a series there's a part in this with like a sequence in a factory, kind of like an old rail yard, and there's all these different locations. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there are the first scene, which is the kind of introduction that goes from a normal day to an absolute catastrophe. And I really like this film a lot. And actually, ahead of doing this list again, I went back and rewatched this, because obviously you'll have heard my initial, if you were on the channel at the time, you'll have heard my initial thoughts on the film. And that was the night, I went to see it maybe at 7 o'clock. At about 9 o'clock I filmed that video. So it was very fresh in the mind. But now, over 2 years onwards, it's been a series I've grown to appreciate, I think, even more. But something I will say, kind of as the stick, but and I did mention this in the video, the original initial thoughts video, is that the best thing about these films is being experienced in the cinema. If you have a big TV with surround sound audio, then you're absolutely perfect. You're just as good. But having that surround sound audio, have that sound and no sound, the living vicariously through Millicent Simmons' character in this movie with her hearing aid and everything, that is such a unique and fantastic element of these movies, and it is the best part of it. And that certainly brings into the tension, the fear factor, and really gets you involved, and you feel very much a part of it. And that's all sound. The whole movie is about sound, of course, being the nature of the creatures they're against. So much is good in this. And also, I'll give a mention to Cillian Murphy, because, of course, Cillian Murphy has now acted again with Emily Blunt in quite a big film called Oppenheimer. You might have heard of it. But having the two of them together in this, not too long before, in a very different scenario, also, both every performance in this is really good, but Cillian Murphy is a brilliant addition of it, and obviously not having, if you've seen the first film, not having John Krasinski's character in this too much, there certainly leaves that role of another character, another adult character. Yes, you've got the kids, yes, you've got Emily Blunt doing an amazing job, as she always does, but Cillian Murphy is a brilliant addition. And yeah, this is a film that I didn't really think I would change my opinion on too much, but actually I think I've grown to appreciate even more since seeing it. Number 4. The Last Duel is directed by Ridley Scott and stars Jodie Comer, Adam Driver, and Matt Damon. Now you might be saying to yourself, hang on, I've been on the channel for a while, I don't remember him even talking about that. You're correct. I never seen this film in 2021. I seen The Last Duel about the time of, around summer 2022. And to be honest, the reason I didn't see it was because I heard a lot of bad things. And Ridley Scott has had, certainly in recent times, kind of hits and misses. And, there was this, of course, Ridley Scott, one of the Hall of Fame directors, I would say, for what he has done and what he has brought to cinema and storytelling as a whole, iconic characters. He really does that brilliantly. But The Last Duel, I think at the time, also went straight to streaming, like a lot of films did in 2021. And I just seem to have missed it. Truthfully, that there's no real other excuse. I just didn't get seeing it when it was in. I don't even know if it even came to my local cinema. But having people like Jodie Comer, who I'm a big fan of, I have to say I'm not too well versed in Killing Eve, but I know that's her real, that's her real television breakout, and she is fantastic in that from what I hear. I haven't really got into it, but I do plan to watch it sometime. You've got Matt Damon, who has been a staple of Hollywood for 20 years now. When was Good Will Hunting? A long time ago. He has been about, let's say. And Adam Driver, who, if you've heard me talk about before, I think is just fantastic. I think I'm yet to see him be disinterested in a role. I think even things that don't give him great scripts, like something like Rise of Skywalker or Last Jedi, where he is far and away still the best thing about those movies, whether it be over the top things like Marriage Story, even things like House of Gucci, if you hear my review on that movie, I didn't like it all, but I thought he was brilliant in it. So Adam Driver's a big fan. So seeing those three as the three leads, that was what sold me. And truthfully, before that, I hadn't heard much about it. I just heard Ridley Scott's new movie, The Last Duel. It's set at kind of semi-medieval times, and that's about it. And I thought, nah, I'll not bother. But then I must have been I seen a trailer or something, and that really sold me on watching it. So I sat and watched this, as I say, last summer, and I loved this movie. I really did. I thought this was one of the most encapsulating, or maybe it just really encapsulated both a time period and also captivated me as an audience member to every part of it. There wasn't really, maybe the first kind of half an hour while we set the tone and learn what we're going to be in for, but see, once you're locked into The Last Duel, you're in. Because the brilliant thing about this film is it's three different perspectives. You see, it's the same story told in 3 acts. And whenever you hear me, or like lots of people, describe movies in 3 acts, and they, sometimes it gets to the 3rd act, it kind of falls apart. This is maybe the most, template movie in that regard. 1st act, 2nd act, 3rd act. And because the 1st act, we hear a certain perspective of the story. The 2nd act, we hear another perspective of the story. And in the 3rd act, we hear the last perspective of the story. And it may not sound that great when I say it like that, but trust me when I say The Last Duel is, in my opinion, one of Ridley Scott's better modern films. And by modern, I mean in the last kind of 3 to 4 years. I don't mean in the last 20. But I really do think The Last Duel brings so much more than I expected it to. I think the character work is really good. I think the dialogue is surprisingly good for Ridley Scott, because that's something that I have never really been too much of a fan of, is Ridley Scott's dialogue. And sometimes his stories can be a little bit, bar of course the absolute fantastic one, things like Gladiator, which I think has brilliant dialogue, things like, all the way back to the movies in the 80s and things like that. He can do this, and this was a real example of that in the recent times. And having something more recently since this, which has been Napoleon, which, if you'd have said to me, you're going to really love one of these films, The Last Duel or Napoleon, both directed by Ridley Scott, I'd have said Napoleon, hands down. It's Joaquin Phoenix, Vanessa Kirby, it's the battles, it's everything. I'm going to love that. And if you saw my review for that, I really was disappointed by Napoleon. And actually, I think I mentioned when I talked about it, how good The Last Duel was in contrast. And I still feel like that. I think everything that the Last Duel doesn't have these big epic battle set pieces like Napoleon does, so it has it one on that front. But nearly everything else, it does better. The character work is better. Again, I use that word perspective, because that perspective work, hearing us, and it's kind of that thing as an audience member, which isn't really delved into too much in too many films, which is, if you're watching a movie from a certain character's perspective, then they're the main character, they're who you're rooting for, because that's how most movies work. But when you're going through the 1st act, you're going, I'm really rooting for this guy. He has really been put through the ringer. And then when we get into the 2nd act and we flip to another character and hear their perspective, you go, oh no, he's, no, I've been wrong for the last hour. It's definitely that. And then you go to the third character and you go, hang on, what have I been? So you kind of question your own, how perception and perspective really gets you kind of tying yourself in knots a little bit. And that was a really interesting time, and I can't think of a film in recent memory that has made me do that so much. Change opinion on characters and do it in such a well and concise way, and not even in a way that it's, oh well, they clearly just left out that bit of dialogue or else we would have had a different opinion. That's not the case. It's perspective, it's tone, it's how we see ourselves saying things and someone else listened to us. And that is such an interesting dynamic, and I really wouldn't have thought of Ridley Scott as that kind of director, because yes, as I say, he can have great dialogue. The one that always sticks in my mind with him with great dialogue is Richard Harris and Russell Crowe at kind of the just after the opening scene in Gladiator. There's brilliant dialogue there. There's brilliant dialogue, there's brilliant story. And that kind of brilliant dialogue is present here in The Last Duel. So that's why I love this film a lot. This is kind of both an initial thoughts and a 5 of the best talking about it, because I never got to it at the time. But I think The Last Duel is really worthy of your time. I'm really glad I took the time to watch it. And it did get slammed a little bit when it was coming to review times. Critics seemed to be very harsh on The Last Duel at the time. But for what the premise is, I don't think it could have been better for what they were going for. Now, it doesn't have, as I say, big, epic battle scenes. You're not crying your eyes out with emotion, but there's not a moment of this film that I wasn't enthralled, bar the first maybe 20 minutes as you're getting adjusted to, okay, this is the setting, this is what's happening, okay, let's go. That's the only thing. But I would definitely recommend The Last Duel. If you haven't seen it, I would say give it a go. Might not be as much of up your street as it is with me, but I did enjoy it a lot. Number 3. No Time to Die is directed by Kari Joy Fukunaga and stars Daniel Craig, Rami Malek, Lee Saidu, and Ana de Armas. So No Time to Die, Daniel Craig's swan song as 007, with a batting average, as you might have heard if you listened to the initial thoughts at the time, with a good, bad, good, bad, good. You had Casino Royale, which I've already talked about in 5 of the Best, which is my favourite Bond film and is one of my favourite action films of all time. You have Quantum of Solace, which is stinky. You have Skyfall, which is brilliant. You have... what was the other one called? Spectre? Well, that's a really good indictment, isn't it? I can't even remember what it was called. Which was not half as bad as Quantum of Solace by any means, but was forgettable. And then we had No Time to Die, which I really enjoyed. Not as much as Casino Royale, but controversially, and I know people still don't agree with this, and people say, well, no, it's definitely Skyfall is the best Bond film ever. I really love Skyfall. You've heard me talking about it on 5 of the Best as well. I love that film. But I got a lot out of No Time to Die. I really did. And rewatching it for this video, because truthfully this was the one that I rewatched to go, surely you might have been a bit generous there. You might have been a little bit generous. I thought I might have changed my opinion slightly on this. I thought I would have watched No Time to Die again and went, okay, you were a bit generous. You said you enjoyed that more than you actually did. I don't think that's true. And after rewatching it here, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was Daniel Craig's most emotional portrayal as the character. It might be the most emotional portrayal of Bond ever. But again, if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I'm not well versed in my Bond knowledge, so I don't know. But I can't imagine people like Timothy Dalton, Sean Connery, etc. being really emotional. Pierce Brosnan, I can't imagine him crying his eyes out. Whereas Daniel Craig in this brings a lot of heart to the character. A character that's always been very stoic and not too fleshed out as a character. I think that Daniel Craig is brilliant in this. It's one of his better performances that I've seen ever from him. I think No Time to Die might be the best performance from a lot of people, and that also applies to someone like Lee Saido, who I have not seen in too many things bar these Bond films, but I think she's definitely the best she's been in this of the Bond films. I think No Time to Die is definitely her best performance. You have Rami Malek, who I will admit is kind of the only little asterisk beside this movie, because I love Rami Malek. Love him in Bohemian Rhapsody, loved him in something as recently as Oppenheimer for a small role in that. He can bring a lot to roles, but I do think the villain in this was a little bit of an afterthought. But what he does get, a few of those scenes near the end of the film together with Daniel Craig's Bond, are really, really good. I just don't think it lasts long enough. I just don't think they had enough of a screen time together to really have this legendary villain status. He's nowhere near like Le Chiffre, Mads Mikkelsen in Casino Royale, or even Christoph Waltz, or that certainly would have been a hard thing to attain anyway. But something and a sequence that does stick in my mind for many reasons is the Ana de Armas scene. Now, of course, Ana de Armas is a lovely looking woman, but also she's also one of the best parts of this film, and maybe the most charismatic, and brings the most charisma out of Daniel Craig. And I've mentioned this a little bit before, when I talked about Knives Out, which is the chemistry that Ana de Armas and Daniel Craig have in very different roles. Her character dynamic with Benoit Blanc in Knives Out is such an interesting and so different and so far removed to Paloma's character, the character she plays in this, with 007 in this movie, and having the two of them bounce off each other so well. It is only for a prolonged scene, you're only talking maybe a 15-minute scene, but what they bring in that is golden. I think it's so good. I think she's also underutilized. I totally would be up for a spin-off film of her from this. Is that going to happen? Probably not, because she's doing Ballerina, the John Wick film, so I think they would be too similar in that nature. But No Time to Die has a lot of brilliant moments like that. I also think Lashana Lynch is a really good addition to this film. I know she's kind of been there or thereabouts for a little while, but having her in this as more of a prominent role also brings a lot. There is a lot of note, and also some of the emotional moments. There's different scenes in this that really stick in my mind and will for a long time when I think of Bond overall. There's obviously iconic moments from things like Casino Royale and Skyfall in particular, which you'll remember. Skyfall, when he lands on the train, for example, that's one that'll stick in your head as an iconic Bond moment. Him sitting at the poker table across from Le Chiffre in Casino Royale. Absolutely, you'll remember that, no doubt. But the closing shots of Bond in this film, I think, might be the most iconic of Daniel Craig's whole tenure, and they aren't even action-based. And I think that shows how much emotion there was put into this on a very surprising way. I think No Time to Die is still really good. It's really, really good. It doesn't come close to scraping anywhere near what Casino Royale does overall, but for the emotion it brings to it, and the delving out of the character, the family element, the additional side characters all getting a lot. Ray Fiennes as well also in this is a worthy addition. I thought that No Time to Die was good then when I reviewed it that night when I came home after watching it, and I still really enjoy it now. I think it's a great Bond film. I think it's my second favourite Bond film behind Casino Royale, and that's still quite a statement. People still think Skyfall, and I love Skyfall, but I think this just edges it for it slightly, and that's why it's my third favourite film of this year. Number 2. Spider-Man No Way Home is directed by John Watts and stars Tom Holland, Zendaya, and Benedict Cumberbatch. Now, if you think back in recent memory, think of the last 10 years, 15 years. Can you remember many films as hyped as No Way Home was? I could probably count on one hand films that are maybe rival it. Maybe The Force Awakens, maybe Infinity War and Endgame. And that's the only ones I can think of the top of my head. Certainly in the last kind of 5 to 10 years. I think Spider-Man No Way Home had such a build-up, such a hype. I think everybody was bought into this. And usually when a film has that, and some of those films I've mentioned there were good, by the way, and when a film has that level of hype, and there's so much riding on it, usually there's some element of disappointment when it finally does come around. But for Spider-Man No Way Home, you've got Tom Holland in what could be his final Spider-Man appearance. I assume it's probably not going to be. I would imagine he certainly starts another trilogy down the line. You have Zendaya as Mary Jane, who's far and away... comparing her to Kirsten Dunst is just not fair. She is such a step above. You've Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, and one of his... truthfully, Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange in this film is better than he is in both of his own films, Doctor Strange and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. So you've got all that boiled in, and then you have the additions. Now guys, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there is 2 other big names in here, and I'm not even getting to the villains yet. But is it okay to spoil it? Does anybody not know this? Yeah. I didn't say it when I did the initial thoughts at the time. I tried to keep it under wraps because I wanted people, anybody that did watch my video at the time, for the few people that did, I didn't want them going and being spoiled. I wanted to experience the way I was. You go in blind, hoping to see, maybe a little bit of expectation to see, Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. And having the 3 of them bounce off each other with Tom Holland, I, like everybody else, went into this thinking that would be amazing if that happened. But I don't know that they can pull it off. You've got Andrew Garfield lying in every interview saying, "Oh, I wish I'd have got the call. Oh no, they didn't call me. Oh, I'm busy that night." He's a liar. He's a liar, and I love him for it. Because this movie, it was such a nostalgia hit. It was such a emotional movie. Not only to have the characters that you grew up with, Tobey, and I really don't like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies. I don't. But what I do like is Andrew Garfield. I do like him as Spider-Man as well. And Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man 1 is great. Spider-Man 2 is a brilliant superhero film. Spider-Man 3 is kind of stinky, but him all the way throughout them is my Spider-Man from whenever I was younger. Like a lot of you guys, I'm sure. Everybody has their generation's version of that character. And mine would have been Tobey Maguire when I was that age. So having him return, you have Andrew Garfield, and you have the 3 of them connecting with such chemistry it probably should be illegal. The way Tom Holland and Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield bounce off each other in those scenes together, it's just chef's kiss. It is a thing of beauty. There's hilarious moments, there is emotional moments. This whole movie has everything. And let's talk about the villains. You've got people like Doc Ock. You've Jamie Foxx coming back as Electro. You've got the main one, which is Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. And what a return for him. Willem Dafoe is the absolute man. He is the best thing about the first Spider-Man film. I think he is one of the more memorable villains of that time, because at that time, superhero films weren't really a thing. You know, when you think back to when you contrast it with what way superhero films are now, there's about 6 new villains a year, whether it's DC, whether it's Marvel, whether it's whatever. There's the boys, it could be anything. There's all these different superhero characters. But back then, in 2002, I want to say, 2001, 2002, when the first Spider-Man came out, obviously we had the X-Men at that point, which is the only real superhero movie by that time that was really main stage to that level. And Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin back then was a brilliant villain, but he dials it up to 1,000,000 in this, and he is fantastic. He is one of the best MCU villains now. He was the best thing about... I thought he was the best villain far and away. Because while Alfred Molina is brilliant as Doc Ock in both Spider-Man 2 and No Way Home, he isn't as memorable as a villain as the Green Goblin is, as Willem Dafoe is, of course, being, you know, Harry Osborn's father. It's with Norman being that close to home character, but then also that villain, and that iconic villain with the, as people called it, the Power Rangers suit, the green suit. I quite enjoyed that, admittedly. I thought it was hammed up enough to be enjoyable. But you've got all these people coming back and not just going, oh, that's cool to see them. Oh, they're back. J. Jonah Jameson, J.K. Simmons, he is the most iconic voice in... Would he be the most iconic voice in superhero films? And what pictures of Spider-Man? Like, if that's in 2002 or that's in 2021, it sounds, it has the same cadence, it has the same emotion, and it invokes the same reaction from the audience. They just did so much right with this. And don't get me wrong, they probably could have just went, right, let's pay the crowd wants it, let's pay and bring all these big actors in, and they can just be here and they can fight some baddies and then off they go, and that's it. And that could have been the case, and we all would have went, oh, there they are, yeah, that's great. The movie was kind of okay, but yeah. The story in No Way Home is one of my favourite origin stories for a Spider-Man ever. Because the best thing about it is, of course, we've had this development for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, who I believe, and this is where people go, oh, no, I think he is the best live-action Spider-Man. Now, of course, he has been the most fleshed-out character of them all. He started in Civil War. He had his own 2 movies before this. He was in Infinity War. He was in Endgame. He's been everywhere. So he's certainly had the chance to have an origin. But by the end of this film, where he is, I think the last where Tom Holland's Spider-Man ends up at this movie is beautiful, emotional, heartbreaking, but beautiful. I think it is so poetic. I think it is such a love letter to a character that I'll admit I'm not one of these die-hard Spider-Man fans, but I thought this was just brilliant. I also thought there was really tear-jerking moments. I thought there was really emotional moments quite littered throughout this, really brilliant action set pieces, triumphant moments. I think there's such a variety of emotions that comes from No Way Home, and it is basically the opposite of generic. It's the opposite of just getting a cameo and going, oh, there they are. Like, let's be honest, some Marvel movies nowadays just rely on that. The movie being subpar, and then, oh, look, it's such and such. Oh, look, they're back. Blah, blah, blah. Don't care. Whereas this was earned. This was at a time when the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we had Endgame, and we went, okay, let's have a little bit of a lull. And then not long after, we had this. And since Endgame to this point, I'm filming this, a good wee while after, this and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 have been the 2 real triumphs since Endgame. And I think Spider-Man No Way Home is... I think I've rewatched it maybe 4 times since I seen it that first time. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen it more than once as well. And it doesn't get boring. It's really enjoyable. It isn't a case of, right, let's count down the moments until the 2 other guys appear. Come on, where are they? It's not that. And that's all down to people like Tom Holland and Zendaya, who bring so much charm and charisma and such likability. That everybody in this film, on the good side, is so likable. And the villains, in their evil ways, are still very likable. And they also bring, maybe some more than others, people like Sandman or the Lizard from American Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 1. God, I'm losing the plot. That first, the Lizard guy, they don't bring too much, I'll admit. They're just there to fill out the numbers. But people like Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, Willem Dafoe, Green Goblin, even Jamie Foxx as Electro brings quite a lot more than he did in ASM2, Electric Boogaloo. Electro Boogaloo. I really enjoyed No Way Home. I do. I loved it then, I love it now. I'll probably watch it again in 5 years' time and love it then. I think it is a brilliant story. I think it is a brilliantly emotional tale. I think there is triumphant moments throughout that are really still enjoyable now, and it's the initial shock factor has wore off, yes, from seeing it the first time. But for it to stand the test and still be able to watch all the time, to still be able to watch these scenes and enjoy them and not go, okay, well, yeah, they came back great. That's not what this is. No Way Home is a brilliant, brilliant film. It's one of the best Marvel Cinematic Universe's outings ever, in my opinion. And even though it is after the brilliant time that people call it, the Infinity Saga, even though it's after that, it still is a fantastic Marvel movie. And it was close to being my favourite movie of the year, I have to admit. And being a 9.5 out of 10 was close, but it wasn't my favourite film. Because my favourite film is
number 1.
Dune. Is directed by Denis Villeneuve and stars Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, and Jason Momoa. So here it is, my favourite film of the first year of Initial Thoughts, the movie I loved the most that I talked about, or that I didn't talk about. Everything I've seen in 2021, which movie did I love the most? Truthfully, when I looked at the year, there was a few potentials, and I always say that. I always go, well, what could have been the best movie of 2021 before I seen them all? And this is before I even did reviews, because I only started, a few months into the year. But I have to say, Dune, while it did appeal to me on the sense of this could be this next epic. We have things like The Lord of the Rings, the things like Star Wars. You have these bigger franchises, even things like Blade Runner. Just these large kind of sci-fi, fantasy, Star Wars, all these different things that bring so much to it, so much lore, so much depth. But truthfully, I didn't think, when I first heard it was coming out, I went, okay, that's interesting. Obviously, it's based on the book. There was obviously the movie a lot of years back. The book is one of the most recognizable books in... Not that I've read it, but I know a lot of people have read it and a lot of people care about the story so much. To see another big screen adaptation, and of course a bit like Lord of the Rings in that sense, you had the original animated Lord of the Rings from years ago that people weren't as fond of, let's say, and then we had Peter Jackson's trilogy, which I am just not even going to get into because we could be here until the end of time, me talking about and waxing lyrical about Lord of the Rings as a whole. If you've been on 5 of the Best, you know my opinions on that trilogy. But talking about Dune, I thought, I wonder does it have the potential to be another great series like that? Another one that really has people engrossed and engage with the characters, because there is a lot of characters, a lot of houses. A lot of this is like Game of Thrones in that way. A lot of names that are such and such of House Atreides, in the same way that Game of Thrones would have been such and such of House Targaryen, or it's an interesting premise. But I do imagine a lot of people would go a bit like myself when I first was about 45 minutes into watching Dune, which was, okay, so that's his son, and then that's it. But once you get in, and once you get hooked, and once you learn the characters, you learn the lore, and you learn the situation that's happening, I absolutely loved this. I thought Dune was one of the most... It's the most enthralled I've been at a new movie. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but like a new IP that I'm so unfamiliar. I knew nothing about this. Didn't know any characters. If you'd have said to me before watching this movie, name a character from the Dune book, I wouldn't be able to name you one if you paid me £1 million. It was not going to happen. But then it gets to now, and I've now seen Dune. And I'm telling you this, I am so excited for the next film. I cannot wait. By the time you're seeing this, it might even be out. I'm counting down the minutes until I get seeing it. And having someone like Denis Villeneuve, who I think is one of the most fantastic directors working today, Some of the shots in this movie, and I mean, you hear me talking about the setting and the cinematography, and I always use that example of a desktop wallpaper. This movie, the whole movie is gorgeous. There's part in this movie, and probably will be in the second movie as well, with like fire on sand in this darkness and people appearing from. I swear to God, this movie is so good. The stuff with the sandworm, the stuff with the vast sea of sand, but even just the core emotional moments. There's an emotional moment, certainly early in the film, when Oscar Isaac, who I love so much, I think was criminally underutilized, like a lot of people were, in that Star Wars trilogy, talking to his son, Timothy Chalamet, and that scene is one of my favourite scenes in recent memory. Just them standing on the cliff top having a chat. But I really love that, and that showed that yes, you have the epicness, yes, you have the vastness, you have this sprawling world building, globe hopping, planet hopping, everything. But you also have good character work, brilliant dialogue that gets you hooked from the minute go. And also I want to talk about Rebecca Ferguson, because Rebecca Ferguson in this is so damn good. Her Oscar Isaac and Timothy Chalamet in particular, but there's a lot of other brilliant performances. I don't really want to just go through the whole cast because I think everybody is doing an amazing and stellar job here. But those three in particular, Timothy Chalamet, of course, is our lead, who I think has his ceiling doesn't exist when it comes to being an actor, because he has been in so many things now. I'm yet to see him be less than subpar. Even if the movie isn't great that he's in, I think he brings so much to it, even if it's a limited role or a lead role. He is so fantastic. I think studios have every right and should be putting him as their main man, because he has earned it and brings so much to it. Even something more recently like Wonka, he just lives that role. He brings so much to it. And I think him as Paul Atreides in this is fantastic. His father, Oscar Isaac, in this. Oscar Isaac, I think, is one of the most criminally underrated actors working today. I think he's fantastic. But I mentioned there about Rebecca Ferguson. And Rebecca Ferguson is someone that I wasn't too big of a fan of, and then became an absolute... I think she is so good. And the reason I think that is because of her performance as Rose the Hat in Doctor Sleep. I think she is one of the best horror villains of all time. I think she is absolutely enthralling in that movie. I think the villainous arc that she brings to that character and the story that she heads up in that movie is fantastic. I mean, you're in a Shining sequel, and she is the one shining, I'll tell you that. But yeah, she is, as a mother in this movie, as a protective mother, but also everything else that she can bring. The powers in these movies, which I assume will be elaborated even more in the second one. I keep saying these movies because obviously there's part 2 to come, and by that time you might have seen it. But I just thought everything about Dune was so much more than I thought it would be. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed every bit of Dune. I loved it. The only thing, and this is such a silly thing to gripe on, and you might say, well, if you enjoyed everything, why did you not give it 10 out of 10? This is the only thing. I'm waiting to see what part 2 is like. Because if part 2 is kind of stinky, if part 2 really doesn't recapture the magic of the first film, then it might make this slightly worse. And I know I'm usually the first one to say, well, but that you shouldn't blame a sequel on, the original or whatever, or dampen the original's quality because of the sequel. I just think with this being a part 1 and part 2, and I don't know if it is going to end up being a part 3 or if it's just a 2-movie extravaganza. I just loved Dune. I simply loved it. I think it is as good as a movie can be for something so fresh. And I know you might go, well, as we said there, the book and the older movies and blah blah blah. I think for something that's so new, for so many people that haven't seen it, and for it to do so well, and let's be honest, this isn't a movie that would invite you in. This isn't a movie, by that I mean, it isn't a movie that would go, well, there's this actor's in it and you'll love them because they'll be singing and dancing and they'll be doing this. It isn't that kind of movie. This is the movie you have to come in and really take on board. You have to really get in and locked into the story. But once you're locked in, it's a hell of a ride. Dune is brilliant. I loved it. Loved it so much. For it to be above Spider-Man No Way Home shows how much I really did love it. And it was definitely my favourite film of this year. I think it's far and away the most... It's probably my favourite IP, new IP, in the last 2 to 3 years. Because I know there's only been a handful, I suppose that's probably the reason. But this just really brought so much out of me. I got so much out of this. I've rewatched it about 6 times since I seen it, and I think I'll rewatch it again before I watch part 2. I think Dune is brilliant, and that's why it's absolutely my favourite film of the year 2021. So that has been the year 2021, the year initial thoughts began, the year this channel began, the year I really started to really love getting into talking about movies and everything, and it's a year that I look back on so fondly because of that. And the channel started, I know I'm a small channel and I just like talking about movies, and that was the case then, and it's probably still the case now, but it never changed how much I loved movies, but it certainly, well, it did a little bit because it amplified it. It made me appreciate cinema going more. And of course, we were locked down. We weren't out in the cinema at the start of this year. So once the cinemas reopened this year, I haven't really stopped since. And I'm sure a lot of you guys will be the same. If you're big cinema goers, going back to the cinema after the shutdown and everything, and it being gone for so long, it was just a beautiful moment, and I really haven't stopped going since. I'm there nearly every week, maybe even twice a week. So this is where it all started, really, for me and my and the real reigniting of movie love. Because 2020, of course, was a very empty year when it came to movies. It started well, and seen a few movies in January, but 2021 was when we really kicked back into gear. And I'm not gonna mess you about. 2021 wasn't the most fantastic year of depth when it comes to movies. There wasn't a million movies that were all 9s and 10s out of 10, because there weren't. But there was a good quality here, and I have to say, particularly those top 2, Dune and Spider-Man No Way Home, would have been on top 5 any year, and I mean that. They definitely would. No Time to Die, Last Duel, and Quiet Place Part 2, all 3 of them I absolutely loved for what they were. But I do have to admit, if it was a stronger year, if it was a year that had lots more 9s and 10s, they maybe just wouldn't have broke into the top 5. But they certainly would be on the closeness. And let's talk about the honourable mentions and which ones were close to breaking into this top 5. And truthfully, there was only one, and that was The Courier with Benedict Cumberbatch. Benedict Cumberbatch, one of my favourite performances of his, maybe ever. I think that movie is criminally underrated. I think it was very unlucky not to get into this top 5. And looking at the top 5, it could have got on there. Truthfully, it would have been between it and A Quiet Place, maybe. I like The Quiet Place more. Yeah, the top 5 is definitely the top 5, but it was definitely 6th. The other movies, Shang-Chi, one of the better Marvel movies, certainly one of the better new Marvel movies, with a new hero, a new character, a new everything. Spencer, a movie I just adored Kristen Stewart's performance in that movie. If you listen to my initial thoughts at the time, I thought I wanted her to win the Oscar. She didn't. She did get nominated, I suppose, so it wasn't completely nothing. But I love that film. It's a very, very slow burner of a film. It's very slow, very methodical. The pacing is very, very... It does not have any speed to it. But Spencer I really enjoyed. I would watch that film again. Nobody and The Guilty, 2 films I've seen after 2021. So 2 films I enjoyed, but not enough to break into the top 5. So that's been the year of 2021, and that's where everybody, all the movies landed on the top 5. That's why they landed where they did. Dune and No Way Home, I always knew that was the top 2. It was just a case of which one did I prefer. And it didn't really take a lot of deliberation, because while No Way Home is absolutely brilliant, and it's a real nostalgic... it was like a reward. No Way Home. It was a reward for being a fan of superhero films, and certainly that subgenre, the Spider-Man subgenre. It was a real rewarding time at the cinema. It was worth all the hype, and it's not often you say that with big movies that have that level of hype. And then Dune was just... it was just what I wanted. I just wanted at least one movie this year that really... I'll look back and go, oh, that was the year Dune came out. Amazing. That's all that's all I look for. Because that's all it is. When you talk about movie years, that's all you really boil it down to. You've got the movies that are good, but ultimately forgettable. You've got the movies that are great, and you wouldn't mind revisiting. And then you've got the movies that are like, oh yeah, that's the year that these 5 or these 4 or these 3 came out. You know, whether it's the year 2000, whether it's year 2005, 2014, 2028, 2038, it wouldn't matter. You always have like 3 movies that you'll always go, oh, that's the year that came out. I love that. Yeah, you should have seen that at the time. Surprised you didn't. You know, those kind of conversations. And that's what I would have with 2021, especially those top 2. But yeah, that's been my thoughts on the first year that Initial Thoughts began. If you like this video, leave a like. Let me know you enjoyed it. If you want to stick around, subscribe to the channel. This series is we're nearly there. We're nearly caught up to present day. A few more months and then we'll be there. We'll be caught up to, we'll be doing 2023, and then from January it'll be 2024. And then 5 of the Best is complete after a long time. I've been working on this series for so long. I enjoy it. I enjoy celebrating these years of movies. And yeah, if you do want to stick around, as I say, subscribe. I'd appreciate you so much for it. And if you do, I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.